walked away essentially at the peak.
Well, it seemed to me that was the only intelligent thing to do.
Some bands call it quits, only to reunite down the road, while others close the door forever. Dire Straits falls into the second category. Despite being one of the most legendary rock bands of all time, selling millions of albums and crafting timeless hits, they're not coming back. And the only person who could change that is Mark Knopfler, the band's frontman and creative force. But he's made it clear, time and time again, that Dire Straits is a chapter that's been written and closed. He's turned down massive, multi-million-dollar offers for a reunion, because to him, it's all in the past. And it's not because of some dramatic falling out or explosive feud. It's simply the result of a long journey that started with struggles, climbed to dizzying heights of success, and eventually reached a natural ending. Before Dire Straits became rock legends, Mark Knopfler had to carve out his own musical identity, starting with a deep love for the guitar. Born on August 12, 1949 in Glasgow, Scotland, he grew up in a household that valued intellect. His father, an architect and chess master, fled Hungary in 1939 to escape the Nazis, while his mother was a teacher. When Mark was 8, the family moved to Newcastle, where he spent most of his childhood. Even though no one in his family was a professional musician, music was always around. He was captivated by the blues and rock and roll from an early age, with one of his earliest memories being the sound of harmonica melodies and boogie-woogie piano played by his uncle. Like many British teenagers of the time, Mark idolized Hank Marvin from the Shadows and dreamed of owning a Fender Stratocaster. But when he asked his father for one, he was instead handed a much cheaper Hofner Super Solid. It wasn't the guitar of his dreams, but it was enough to spark a lifelong passion. Despite his love for music, he didn't dive into it right away. Instead, he took a more practical route and pursued journalism. He studied at Harlow College for a year before landing a trainee position at the Yorkshire Evening Post. Writing for a newspaper sharpened his storytelling skills, but it never dampened his love for music. On his days off, he'd play in bars, jam with friends, or spend hours experimenting on his guitar. During this time, he also crossed paths with poet Basil Bunting, who left a lasting impression on how he viewed creativity and art. But journalism was never going to be his final destination. Before long, he realized he couldn't ignore his passion, so he quit his job and set off on a journey across England and Europe, hitchhiking and making ends meet by playing in small cafes and pubs. He was deeply inspired by blues guitarists like Chet Atkins, Scotty Moore, and B.B. King. Unlike most guitarists, Mark didn't use a pick. Instead, he developed his signature finger-picking style. At first, it wasn't even a conscious choice. It happened out of necessity. He once got his hands on an old acoustic guitar with a warped neck that made playing with a pick nearly impossible without constantly snapping strings. So he started using his fingers instead, and that happy accident became the defining element of his sound. In the 1960s, he played in a small band with his school friend Sue Hercombe, even making an appearance on local television. Later, he joined the blues rock group Brewer's Droop, which gave him his first taste of the professional music scene. Though he didn't stay with them for long, it was a crucial stepping stone. By 1973, Mark had graduated from the University of Leeds, where he kept playing music and recorded a demo of Summer's Coming My Way. He then formed a band called the Silver Heels with Steve Phillips, Dave Johnson, and Paul Granger. Unfortunately, the group never made it big. After parting ways with the Silver Heels, Mark took a teaching job at Loughton College while still performing with another band, Cafe Racers. Playing with Cafe Racers turned out to be a game changer. Around this time, Mark's younger brother, David Knopfler, moved to London, and the two began making music together. They bounced ideas back and forth, crafting riffs that would eventually lay the foundation for Dire Straits. Before long, they teamed up with bassist John Illsley, a talented musician who fit right in. The chemistry between them was undeniable. While the music scene at the time was dominated by the loud, rebellious energy of punk rock, they went in the opposite direction. Smooth melodies, emotionally rich guitar work, and songs that told stories. When they found the perfect drummer, Pick Withers, everything clicked into place. And in 1977, Dire Straits was officially born. None of them could have predicted that within a year, their name would be recognized around the world. Sometimes, fate has a way of pushing talent to the top. Dire Straits' journey really began with a demo recorded at Pathway Studios, a small studio in London. Among the songs they laid down, Sultans of Swing stood out. It wasn't a stadium-shaking rock anthem or a heart-wrenching ballad, but something different. A musical story, a tribute to an unknown jazz band Mark had once seen performing in a near-empty bar. There was no spectacle, no attempt to impress, just a group of musicians playing for the sheer love of it. That image stuck with him, and when he got home, he picked up his guitar and wrote the song. Infused with blues influences and thoughtful storytelling, Sultans of Swing didn't initially turn heads. But everything changed when BBC Radio aired the demo on DJ Charlie Gillett's show. The response was immediate. Listeners flooded the station with calls, demanding to hear the song again. Suddenly, record labels were paying attention. Before they knew it, Dire Straits had signed a deal with Vertigo Records and were stepping into the studio to record their debut album. Released in 1978, Dire Straits took a completely different route from the raw intensity of bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash. The album was refined, thoughtful, and deeply emotive. Tracks like Down to the Waterline, Water of Love, and Setting Me Up blended folk, blues, and classic rock into something unique. Mark Knopfler's distinctive guitar playing, with its smooth yet razor-sharp tone, immediately caught the attention of critics, drawing comparisons to Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton. The album was an instant hit, particularly in the United States, where audiences were drawn to its authenticity. Sultans of Swing climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, transforming Dire Straits from a little-known band into international stars. And this was just the beginning. The momentum only grew with each new album. Communique, 1979, Making Movies, 1980, and Love Over Gold, 1982, cemented their place as one of the most influential bands of the era. But nothing compared to what happened in 1985 when they reached their peak with Brothers in Arms. More than just a commercial success, the album changed the game. It became the first album in history to sell over 1 million copies on CD, marking a turning point in the way music was consumed. Songs like Money for Nothing, Walk of Life, and So Far Away became instant classics. Money for Nothing, with its biting satire on the extravagant lifestyles of rock stars and that unforgettable guitar riff, became one of the most iconic opening tracks on MTV during its early years. But success always comes at a cost. When a band reaches the top, they're no longer just musicians, they become a brand. For Dire Straits, that meant never-ending world tours, high-stakes commercial deals, and an intense, non-stop schedule. They were no longer just 4 guys making music in a tiny studio. They were now performers playing for tens of thousands of fans night after night, moving from city to city with barely a moment to breathe. For Mark Knopfler, who had always put the music above everything else, it became overwhelming. The larger the band grew, the more control he lost, and the fame that had once been exciting started to feel like a weight on his shoulders. The very band he had built no longer felt like his own. By this point, the cracks in Dire Straits were impossible to ignore. Some members felt like they had little creative input left, and the band was becoming something they no longer recognized. David Knopfler had already departed in 1980 due to creative differences with Mark, and Pick Withers followed after Love Over Gold, unwilling to continue in an industry that demanded relentless touring and commercial pressures. What had started as a tight-knit indie group had turned into a massive machine, and none of them knew that within a few years, the weight of it all would lead to a decision that would change everything. Dire Straits was heading toward an inevitable end. From the very beginning, there had always been creative tensions, particularly between Mark and David Knopfler. Mark was meticulous and focused on perfection, while David was more laid back and open to a looser, more spontaneous style. These differences became impossible to ignore while recording Communique in 1979. Mark wasn't just the band's songwriter. He also had a clear vision for how their music should sound, and he controlled the recording process down to the smallest details. David, who valued artistic freedom, began to feel like a background player in his own band. As their second album took shape, their relationship grew more strained, with David feeling overshadowed by his older brother. Things reached a breaking point during the making of Making Movies in 1980. Mark's perfectionism intensified, and he demanded multiple retakes whenever he wasn't satisfied with David's playing. Feeling like his creative role had diminished to almost nothing, David made the difficult decision to walk away in the middle of the album's production. He never looked back. Mark completed the record with the help of Roy Bittan from the E Street Band, and Making Movies went on to become one of Dire Straits' most successful albums. But David had no regrets. In later interviews, he made it clear that his departure wasn't about anger or resentment. He simply no longer wanted to be there. David's exit marked a turning point for Dire Straits, pushing them toward a more complex and ambitious sound. But that shift wasn't for everyone. Pick Withers, the band's original drummer, had always preferred a more straightforward blues rock style. When Mark started experimenting with longer, more progressive tracks like Telegraph Road, Withers felt like the band was evolving into something he no longer connected with. After finishing the Love Over Gold tour, he made the decision to leave. There was no dramatic fallout, just a realization that it was time to move on. Despite these changes, Dire Straits reached their peak with Brothers in Arms in 1985, becoming one of the biggest bands in the world. But with that success came an immense cost. The Brothers in Arms tour stretched on for 14 exhausting months, with more than 300 performances worldwide. Night after night, they played in front of tens of thousands of fans. But behind the scenes, the pressure was taking its toll. Mark Knopfler, who had always been deeply invested in the music itself, started feeling increasingly detached from the band. The endless cycle of touring, record label demands, and high-stakes commercial deals made it seem as if he was no longer in control. John Illsley, the only other remaining founding member, felt it too. The joy of playing music was still there, but it was buried under layers of expectations and obligations. After the On Every Street tour from 1991 to 1992, Dire Straits quietly faded away without an official farewell. The tour had lasted over a year, but it never reached the same level of success as their previous ones. When Mark Knopfler stepped off the stage in Zaragoza, Spain, in October 1992, he knew it would be the last time he performed as part of Dire Straits. There was no grand announcement, no farewell tour, no public declaration of a breakup. The band simply ceased to exist. For the next 3 years, Mark barely spoke about Dire Straits. He withdrew from the spotlight, focusing instead on film scores, personal projects, and producing music for other artists. When he finally addressed the subject in 1995, his statement was short and to the point. Dire Straits is over. No anger, no dramatic fallout, just the quiet closing of a chapter. In the world of rock music, it's not uncommon for legendary bands to reunite. From the Eagles to Led Zeppelin, many groups that once declared their breakup have eventually found their way back to the stage. But with Dire Straits, the story was entirely different. Dire Straits didn't break up because of drama or feuds, but that doesn't mean they're a band that will ever reunite. Their final tour drained them completely. Mark Knopfler once admitted there were mornings he woke up not even remembering where he was. The schedule was relentless, city after city, packed venue after packed venue. But he no longer felt the same connection to the music. "I had a great time while it lasted," he reflected. "But when it got too big, I didn't even know the names of everyone on the crew. It had become a massive machine." That machine had carried them to unimaginable heights, but it also pushed them to the breaking point. Even so, the name Dire Straits still holds immense appeal. Over the years, their former management has received one lucrative offer after another for a reunion tour. Major event organizers and music festivals have been willing to pay staggering amounts just to see the band on stage one last time. But Mark has refused every single offer. It's not about the money. He's admitted that the temptation was there. But to him, music was never something to be done for nostalgia or a paycheck. He had always been a perfectionist, and recreating something just to cash in on its legacy wasn't how he wanted to operate. And it's not just Mark who feels that way. Even the other surviving members of Dire Straits have no desire to reunite. John Illsley, the only bassist who stayed with the band from beginning to end, still keeps in touch with Mark and the others. But while they respect one another, they all acknowledge that whatever spirit once drove the band is gone. Dire Straits wasn't just Mark Knopfler. It was a collective, a chemistry that existed in a particular time and place. And that time has passed. David Knopfler, who left early on, never once considered coming back. Pick Withers lost interest in the music industry long ago, and the later members, while still active in music, have moved on from what they once had. There's no real desire to revive Dire Straits, not from the public, but from the people who made it what it was. The most telling sign came in 2018 when Dire Straits was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It should have been a major moment. Most bands in their position reunite for the occasion, if not for a tour, at least for one last performance. Some even make it a sentimental affair, burying old conflicts and celebrating their legacy. But Dire Straits? They did none of that. Mark didn't even attend. There was no grand introduction from a rock legend, no emotional speeches, no triumphant reunion on stage. John Illsley was the only one to accept the award on their behalf, and the moment passed quietly, far from the spectacle people expected. When asked why he skipped it, Mark's answer was simple: "I had no reason to be there." It wasn't out of bitterness or a lack of respect. It was just his way of saying Dire Straits had already had its time. But even though the band itself is long gone, its music hasn't faded. Dire Straits remains one of the most celebrated rock bands in history, their songs still played and loved by generations of fans. And while people continue to wonder about what happened to the members after the stage lights went out, the truth is, none of them tried to relive the past. Out of all of them, no one had a post-band career as successful as Mark Knopfler. When he officially closed the book on Dire Straits in 1995, he made no attempt to chase past glories. He walked away from the chaos of the commercial rock world and focused on what he loved most, simply playing music, his own way. His solo career began with Golden Heart in 1996, an album that leaned far more into folk and country than rock. Free from the pressures of leading a massive band, he embraced the music he truly wanted to create, carving out a path that had nothing to do with nostalgia. Mark explored music on his own terms, no longer concerned with chasing fame or commercial success. This was clear in how he crafted his albums, favoring long, unconventional songs with deep storytelling and meticulous attention to detail. Over the years, he released a series of records, including Sailing to Philadelphia in 2000, The Ragpicker's Dream in 2002, Shangri-La in 2004, and Kill to Get Crimson in 2007, all carrying his unmistakable signature. Among them, Sailing to Philadelphia became his most successful solo effort, featuring a title track collaboration with James Taylor. The album reaffirmed his place as a masterful songwriter, even if he was no longer performing on the grand stages of the Dire Straits era. At 74, Mark continues to compose and refine his unique sound. His latest release, One Deep River in 2024, showcases his ever-evolving folk rock style, with the same intricate guitar work and storytelling that have defined his career. While he may not be a rock star in the traditional sense anymore, he remains what he always intended to be: a musician, a storyteller, a creator of music that speaks to everyday life. He occasionally takes part in special projects, like contributing to the charity single Going Home alongside Bruce Springsteen, Eric Clapton, and Slash, raising funds for Teenage Cancer Trust. Though large-scale tours are a thing of the past, he stays connected with his fans through carefully crafted releases and select performances, proving that his artistry remains as strong as ever. Another member who underwent a significant transformation after Dire Straits was John Illsley, the band's longtime bassist. He also pursued a solo career, though not with the same level of recognition as Mark. Over the years, he released 8 solo albums, including Long Shadows in 2016 and Coming Up for Air in 2019. But at some point, he realized his passion for making music had faded. Instead of forcing himself to keep going, he made a bold decision to step away from music entirely and embrace an entirely different artistic pursuit: painting. Unlike Mark, who continues to compose, John found a new creative outlet away from the stage. "I leaned my bass against the wall and said, 'Thank you very much, but now I'll do something else,'" John once shared about his decision. He studied painting in London for several years, honing his skills before eventually hosting his own exhibitions. While he no longer plays music, he remains an essential part of Dire Straits' legacy, often appearing in interviews and events related to the band's history. Even though he has left the world of touring behind, his deep connection to the music remains, and he still speaks fondly about the time he spent with the band. Some former members have taken a different approach, keeping Dire Straits' legacy alive in their own way. Alan Clark, who played keyboards for the band from 1980 to 1995, along with percussionist Danny Cummings and saxophonist Mel Collins, formed Dire Straits' legacy. This group performs classic Dire Straits hits alongside guest musicians, allowing longtime fans to relive the band's greatest moments. Though neither Mark Knopfler nor John Illsley is involved, the project has drawn a strong following, with audiences eager to hear the songs that defined an era. These performances are more than just a tribute. They are a testament to the lasting impact of the music, proving that Dire Straits' influence will never fade. What do you think about Dire Straits? Would you want them to reunite, or do you believe their legacy is best left untouched? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest videos.